Welcome in and Merry Christmas. I know it's Christmas Eve, so you're all getting ready or you're already watching whatever it is you're watching. You're just cemented into your spot where you're going to watch football for the next however many. So if it's still early and you're still watching this ahead of Christmas Eve, then congratulations, you've made it. If not, then good luck. It's going to be a long couple of days with a lot of food, a lot of drinking, and a lot of football. That's why we're here, by the way, the latter part of that. So hit the thumbs up button, please, if you can. Subscribe, please, if you can. And on top of that, we're going to tell you about what's going on here at BetMGM. We're going to build this awesome parlay here for you. And we're going to tell you about final days or so that you can take advantage of this pretty cool offer over at the Discord. So let us start first and foremost with the Tennessee Titans. Now, again, we're building a 3-leg parlay here. So it does mean no good to lay a hook on a parlay. On top of that, what I'd really like to do here is just take Tennessee to win this game outright. And immediately, well, what about Ryan Tannehill? He's shut down, and Malik Will. Okay. I don't think there's any real drop-off from what you're getting offensively on the Titans going to their backup quarterback. It's not a knock on the career of Ryan Tannehill, but this offense just wasn't really clicking and cooking the way that we've seen it. You need somebody at least to be mobile to get around the lack of protection. So you have got that with a young quarterback here. Now, the flip side is what's going on the other side with the Titans, or the Texans, pardon me. This is desperation mode for the Tennessee Titans. The Texans have covered each of their last 2 games, and they've had chances to win each of those games. 17-point dog at Dallas, 14-point dog at home versus the Chiefs. They had fourth quarter leads. And what's going to happen? People are going to jump right back onto Houston and say, yeah. Give me Hugh. Davis Mills is atrocious. 32nd in the league in interception percentage. 13-12 TD to pick ratio. And 2-9 straight up, 4-7 against the spread on the road in his career. And it gets even worse. The TD to pick ratio is 7-13. Both of his wins on the road have come at Jacksonville. And that's old Jacksonville. Well, actually, it was earlier. But that's the point. All right.
What is? What? Oh, I can't hear it. So. Yep, I'm good. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a massive Stokastic NBA strategy show, because last night there was only 2 NBA games. Tomorrow there are 0 NBA games, which means there are 14 games being played on Friday for Adam and I to break down. As you guys come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. If you guys have not signed up at Prize Picks yet, if you do, using the link that we have below or the link that's about to be thrown into the YouTube chat, you're going to get up to $100 on your first deposit. But in addition to that, you get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum when you sign up at Prize Picks using our link. So, Adam, quite a bit of a different look for tonight's NBA slate, 14 games as compared to 2, which is kind of nice because we don't really have to talk about a lot of the bullshit.
Yeah, every time I see we have like this many games, I'm always upset because, for one, I hate playing slates with this many games, and 2, like, the immediate thought is like, man, it's going to take 2 hours to talk about this, but it actually is kind of easier because you can just not talk about a lot of shit.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams that we're kind of just going to be able to blow by because there's going to be certain teams that just don't have any players on the injury report, and those are teams that we're probably not going to really want to get to, and so much value will ultimately end up opening up on a 14-game slate. But where we start is with the San Antonio Spurs against the Orlando Magic, and Keldon Johnson. He has missed time lately, and he's officially listed as questionable for tonight. And I think we should also consider Jakob Poeltl as somebody who could potentially be rested. So first, I just want to ask you about Poeltl. Is that something you're considering at all with this team? Extended absence for him, and then tail end of a back-to-back?
I mean, I hadn't thought about it since this is the first game of the night, and we'll know ahead of time, but it wouldn't surprise me now that you mentioned it.
So we'll get past that part for now, but Keldon Johnson, he's questionable. What ends up happening if he returns to the lineup? Because I tend to think that would make most of these Spurs guys pretty unappealing.
Yeah, it just makes most of the team unappealing. Like you'd still have Devin Vassell at 7,200 in that range where it's like, oh, Devin Vassell can have a big game, but kind of like you were alluding to at the top of the show a minute ago, with 14 games, guys where it's just like, oh yeah, maybe they'll play well, kind of just get pushed pretty far down the list. So if Keldon's back, I really don't think I would have much interest at all here. Right now, we have Keldon projected in. We have about 4 to 5% ownership coming into each of Trey Jones, Jakob Poeltl, Devin Vassell. I mean, that all perfectly fine, makes sense. No ownership going anywhere else, but it would make this team just wholly unappealing.
And then as for if Keldon Johnson is out, let's say Jeremy Sochan sticks in the starting lineup, had that big game last night, was really a difference maker on the 2-game slate. Is Sochan somebody you'd be looking to get back to in the event that number one, he starts, and then two, if Keldon Johnson is out?
I wouldn't be that interested in him today. I had a lot of him yesterday, which was great, but he's like a 0.75 fantasy point per minute guy. He played 31 minutes last game, which was certainly more than I expected. He is somebody that does frequently deal with foul trouble. I think when he starts, you typically are going to project 26 to 28 minutes. It's just a situation where he was, I thought, a great contrarian play yesterday. Because there just weren't that many other options and he wasn't getting a lot of ownership. But here, I'm pretty confident you're going to be able to find guys that look better. So if he is starting if he is starting, which I expect him to start regardless, but if Keldon Johnson's out, obviously that's a little bit more production to go around. He'd be fine at 4K, but I just don't think he would end up really standing out on this slate.
And then one thing I will add is that if Jakob Poeltl sits, I would anticipate Zach Collins moving back into the starting lineup, but he's already priced up from what we saw before when Jakob Poeltl was out. So Zach Collins at $5,800 on DraftKings, we saw him make 6 starts in the absence of Poeltl, 25 minutes per game, 23 fantasy points. Given where he's currently priced, it wouldn't make him some guy who's just an automatic value play. It would be totally different if we saw Zach Collins still around min price, but he's so expensive now that even if Poeltl sits, it would be really hard for me to have that much interest.
Yeah, it would just be a secondary option where, sure, he might play 28 minutes, but he's $5,800. He's a fantasy point per minute guy. He's just going to look like a pretty neutral play.
So let's move on to the Orlando Magic side. And another interesting injury for this team, although not one that I figures to really open up value because Wendell Carter Jr. is questionable. He has not played in a very long time now. So the last time Wendell Carter Jr. was active for Orlando came all the way back on November 18th. So over a month since we've last seen Wendell Carter Jr. active. So obviously him being ruled out, the players are already priced for that kind of scenario. But if Wendell Carter Jr. returns, what does it do to this team?
So we had talked a bit about this recently that sooner or later Orlando is going to become an absolute mess for DFS where there's just nothing you really want to play. And we could be getting the start of that today. If Wendell Carter Jr. comes back, I think the biggest change is just that you're probably going to see Mo Wagner move back to the bench. Maybe it's Bol instead. But my guess is Wagner, and then you see center minute split between Carter and Bamba. But I also don't know if they would actually kick Mo Wagner out of the rotation. Like, he's been playing reasonably well. He's stuck as a starter. It would be kind of weird to just be like, oh yeah, you're not playing any minutes now. So I don't know if they would end up just sort of adding a body to the rotation. I think there's a good chance you would see Admiral Schofield kicked out of the rotation and Mo Wagner get some of those minutes. But it would just make that whole front court even messier. I mean, you could see Bamba kicked from the rotation too. That's entirely possible. They were doing that earlier in the year. But it would also, if Carter's back, it makes those Bol minutes even scarier to try and find because, they haven't been prioritizing giving him minutes anyway. Then you add another front court body and also, a relatively high usage guy in Carter. So it would certainly not make anybody look better if Wendell Carter comes back.
And then we've also got Gary Harris is questionable. He's been out for a little bit of time. So it's going to be tough to find the minutes around here. And then also guys like Boncaro and Franz Wagner, you would assume that if Wendell Carter Jr. is back, just a little bit less usage to go there. But I am seeing that Markelle Fultz still is expected to be picking up some ownership on this slate. So right now, Fultz is projected for 19% ownership over on FanDuel. On DraftKings, Fultz is projected for 16% ownership. So given the size of the slate, Fultz is actually one of the more popular plays of the night. We've seen the kind of upside that Fultz has had. It's kind of funny, though, that people have generally not played Fultz a whole ton lately, but now all of a sudden everybody comes back from the Magic and Fultz's ownership goes up. What would you make of a somewhat popular Fultz if we did have Wendell Carter Jr. and Gary Harris back in the mix?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised at the ownership because I think he's a reasonable play at 5,800. I assume he plays around 30 minutes here. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but this is going to be a rough show because neither of the sites that add rotations or that post game rotations have them from Wednesday. So that's going to be problematic. But typically you're going to get 30 to 32 minutes from Fultz. He's about a fantasy point per minute guy. Like, I think he's fine. I'm just surprised that you're getting 16% ownership on a slate this big.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. So somebody I'd likely be underweight to the field too, particularly if Wendell Carter Jr. and Gary Harris are back in the mix. Just other guys to soak up minutes. Anything you want to add from Orlando?
No. I mean, Paolo Banchero's good, but also 14 game slate.
All right. So the Los Angeles Clippers take on the Philadelphia 76ers in our next game. And one key piece of news that we have here from the Clippers is that John Wall is questionable. And while he hasn't been playing a massive role as of late, could we count on extra minutes from Reggie Jackson if John Wall is not able to play?
Possibly. We have seen that happen, at times this year where when Wall is out, Jackson does play more. You do have basically a fully healthy Clippers team now, though. So that is a little bit concerning. Like, you could certainly just see, Terrence Mann and Norman Powell sort of soak up those minutes, Luke Kennard as well. So I would give Reggie Jackson a couple more minutes if Wall is out, but also probably wouldn't be enough to really move the needle and make him look like that good of an option.
Yeah, and then as for the other guys on the Clippers, it's like you said, they're healthy. I don't know how many times we've seen the Clippers field a full roster this year, but at most it's like 4 or 5 times. There's very few games where we've seen this whole team active. So I don't really think this is all that appealing of a spot, particularly if John Wall plays.
Yeah, neither do I. It's just, again, it's a healthy team on a 14 game slate. You had several of these guys on minutes limits on Wednesday. I don't know if that changes or not. You ended up getting trying to pull up box scores, which is not a good way to do this, but you ended up getting 31 minutes from Kawhi. You got 31 from George. So, I would guess you're getting probably like 34 minutes from George here, but I don't really see anything from the Clippers that I find interesting.
So let's talk about the Philadelphia 76ers then, and another team that isn't dealing with any new injuries. Tyrese Maxey's been out for an extended period of time, so that's already priced in at this point. We've got Joel Embiid and James Harden as pay-up options, but once again, one of these spots where there isn't really that much value to be had because there aren't players out. These are a lot of the spots that I feel like, cool, if you're paying up for Joel Embiid or James Harden, those are viable options, but it's hard to really find value in this kind of situation.
Yeah, low-owned Harden, low-owned Embiid. You kind of can't go wrong there. I mean, outside of the fact that Harden has been awful the last couple of games, and you very much did go wrong. But from a roster building standpoint, you're always going to be happy getting to those guys at low ownership. But they're also just not really going to stand out as priorities now that Harden's up to about 10K and Embiid's over 11K. The opportunity cost that comes at the center position when every team is playing. So it's going to be difficult to really prioritize those guys. Tobias Harris actually leads the team in ownership right now at 7.5%. He's just somebody that probably falls off by the time we get to lock. He at 6,200 should play 34, 35 minutes. I can see how he would sort of just, land in a lineup as the last guy in, but chances are by lock, you're going to have enough value where you end up just, going to a cheaper guy and then upgrading somewhere else.
Yeah, and 2 games that have extremely low totals relative to the other games on the slate that will bring down some of the projections for players in this game. Clippers 76ers, that game has the lowest total of the night. And the second lowest total is actually our next game, the Toronto Raptors against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So we know that we're going to get big minutes out of the core guys from Toronto, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby. Although Scotty Barnes actually hasn't been closing some games as of late just because he's been so poor, particularly defensively. We've got Gary Trent listed as questionable, but as you and I have talked about in some of these recent games, even Gary Trent getting ruled out, it doesn't change all that much for the Raptors.
No, it doesn't, because Trent isn't a guy that really impacts anything like production-wise. He's not a very high usage guy. He's not a very high assist guy. The offense, whether Gary Trent is out there or not, is running through Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet. So if Trent's out, the biggest impact is just that it opens up minutes for some other guys, whether that's Hernan Gomez or Flynn or Boucher. But those price tags are all at points where they're pretty marginal plays, even if Trent is out. And then for the Siakam, VanVleet, and Anunoby Barnes guys, they're just not really going to be impacted here.
Yeah, and as a result, kind of hard for me to want to get anything from this game. Cleveland, just such a difficult matchup. really good defense, play at a slow pace. One of the main reasons that we're looking at this game is having the second lowest total of the slate. And then also Pascal Siakam, while you and I have talked about how he's somebody who kind of gets overlooked as a star and a fantasy star, I don't know this is the spot where I'm really dying to pay up for him.
Yeah, me neither. It's a difficult matchup. He played 41.2 minutes again last game. He's clearly really, really, really good. And if you get him into lineups, great. You know the type of ceiling that he has. But this isn't really the matchup where I'm looking to seek that out. You got 40 minutes from Van Vliet last game. He's at 8,100. I think there's going to be a lot of guards that look a little bit better than him. This is just another team that just doesn't look very appealing.
On the other side, we do have some potential for value from Cleveland, even though this is a game with a lower total. Evan Mobley is questionable, and Lamar Stevens is questionable. Now, Lamar Stevens being questionable typically wouldn't matter, but if Evan Mobley is ruled out, that's just one less guy to potentially soak up minutes. Kevin Love has seen his playing time slowly start to increase over the last few games. If there's no Mobley and there's no Lamar Stevens, what would be standing out to you from Cleveland?
Yeah, I mean, if there's no Mobley, you could certainly get some more Kevin Love. He's coming off of a game where he played 29 minutes. A lot of that was because Mobley was in foul trouble. The game before that, you had gotten 24. So we've certainly seen that Kevin Love is no longer on any sort of restriction. He's coming in at $4,200 here. Even if he plays 20 minutes, he's going to project relatively well, not necessarily in the context of a 14-game slate, but just relative to his salary. If Evan Mobley is out, it's likely that you're getting a few more minutes from Kevin Love. I don't think they would start him, but they could. I assume you would see Chetty slide into the starting lineup alongside. Well, I think that if Stevens is in, you would just see Okoro stay in the starting lineup. If Stevens is out, you would probably get Okoro and Chetty starting would be my guess, but certainly could get some more minutes from Kevin Love if Mobley is out. And then, also more playing time from a $3,200 Chetty.
Yeah, and then one thing that we've seen in the past about Chetty is he's somebody who, even when he's on the fringes of the rotation, he gets thrust into the starting lineup when they're shorthanded, and he typically ends up playing a bunch of minutes when he's in that role. But otherwise, we don't always see a ton of Chetty. But last year, for instance, he made 3 starts, and he did not play very many minutes last year. But in the 3 starts he had last year, he played 38 minutes, 36 minutes, in one game where he played 16 minutes, but he left that game early with an injury. So the kind of minutes that we'll see at times when Chetty gets thrown into the starting lineup. Anything else that stands out to you from Cleveland?
No, it's just another team where, yes, clearly Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell are high upside plays, but you're just going to have a lot of guys that look like that. Jared Allen, again, playing huge minutes, played 40 minutes last game. We've seen him average about 36 per game since he came back from injury. He's 6,700. He's going to look good, but so are 12 other dudes at center.
So let's hit on the next game, the Chicago Bulls against the New York Knicks. And a spot where we actually have some news out of Chicago. This has been a team that's been relatively healthy as of late. And as a result, there just haven't really been value guys to get to. But for today, Alex Caruso is out, Derek Jones is out, and that opens up some potential here. I know that we saw Kobe White actually go off last game, ended up playing a bunch of minutes. One thing that was kind of annoying is I thought Kobe White was over-owned in large field tournaments. And the game starts and Alex Caruso gets hurt. It's like, well, shit, now Kobe White just has to play a ton of minutes. But should we expect a whole bunch of minutes from Kobe White again today?
I think so. So even in the first half, when Alex Caruso was in last game, you got a ton from Kobe White. He played about 7 minutes in the first quarter, played another 11 in the second quarter because he was playing well. I think looking at the second half rotation last game is a reasonable way to project this. Kobe White in the second half played about 12 minutes. I think, expecting him to play around 26 to 28 minutes here makes some sense, probably somewhere in between what happened in the first half and the second half. I would assume Moose started the second half, played the entire third quarter and 8 minutes to close the game. So he played a ton in the second half. I don't know that he plays that much, but certainly should see enough playing time from Desumnu at 3,400 that he's going to look like a solid point per dollar value. You will also have Goran Dragic back today, so that's a little bit different than, or not a little bit, that's different than last game. That is another backcourt guy that could soak up some of those minutes.
Did you see how the last game ended, by the way?
No.
It was so the Bulls won. It was a buzzer beater. It was a buzzer beater by Dosunmu. We got an offensive rebound. But the thing I found was really funny about it is that John Collins got knocked over towards the end of the game, and Dosunmu fell on top of him. So they all jumped on Dosunmu to celebrate, which meant the entire Bulls team was celebrating on top of John Collins, who was just at the bottom of the pile. which
That's awesome.
which I had never seen before. And none of the Hawks players realized for the longest time either, because John Collins like kind of laying there waiting for somebody to help him up, but nobody was. So it was just the entire Bulls team celebrating on top of his corpse pretty much.
That's awesome. I had not seen that.
Yeah, it was amazing ending to the game. Also, they lost because John Collins dropped the rebound and then just fell to Dosunmu, makes the layup, and they celebrate on his body. But other players from the Bulls, Vooch, Levine, DeRozan, do any of them stand out as pay-up options?
No, I think they all just look pretty average. The price tags are reasonable: 7,600 for Levine, 74 for Vooch, 84 for DeRozan. They're all playable, but again, 14-game slate. You have 10% ownership coming into DeRozan, 4 to Vooch, 4 to Levine. That all just seems fine. I am kind of surprised that DeRozan's getting more ownership than Levine, just because Levine is 800 less expensive and has better positional flexibility. But other than that, it all makes sense.
So let's talk about the Knicks. And from the New York side
hang on.
of the game,
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just because it stands out. So I would assume right now projected for 25% ownership. Kobe White projected for 8 for 600 more. Goran Dragic projected for 2 for 300 less. That is a very reasonable pivot if you want to swap, especially in lineups where you need a contrarian play. Some Dosunmu to Goran Dragic. It's not crazy to think that Dragic beats him more than 1 in 12 times.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good shout out and makes some sense. Now, from the Knicks side of the game, Quentin Grimes is questionable. Now, if he's out, are we going to be looking to get back to Emmanuel Quickley, who I got a lot of upset messages in the first quarter after I was high on Emmanuel Quickley last game, because the first quarter was horrific for him, because not only did he not do anything, he literally didn't take any shots, had no fouls, no points, nothing in the first quarter as a chalk play. And then he ends up just going absolutely bonkers in the second half of that game. So I think he actually scored 9 real life points in the first 90 seconds of the second half of the last game, and then quickly got back on track, no pun intended. But it was kind of a weird box score from Quickley because his usage was only 14.9%. He just happened to make nearly every single shot he made. So how should we be viewing Quickley if he draws another start?
So the minutes were there, which that's the clear positive takeaway. He played 34 and a half minutes, and that's just going to make Quickley look pretty good at 4,900. But it is worth being concerned about the usage, because if he's starting, that just means a lot of those extra minutes are being played alongside all 3 of Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett, and Julius Randle. With Randle on the floor this year, Quickley's played 311 minutes, and he has a 14.7% usage rate. He's averaged 3/4 of a fantasy point per minute. So that's a really big deal, and that's just Randle. That's not accounting for the other 2. By comparison, without Randle on the floor, Quickley has averaged 1.08 DraftKings points per minute with a 24% usage rate. So simply playing alongside Julius Randle has knocked his usage rate down by 10 points and taken about 1/4 of a fantasy point or 1/3 of a fantasy point per minute off of Emmanuel Quickley. So it's a spot where you're very clearly getting that big trade-off where, okay, he's going to play 9 to 10 more minutes than if he comes off the bench, but he's also, for a lot of those minutes, going to not be any sort of an offensive priority like we're used to him being when he does come off the bench. So I think it kind of just creates a situation where the ownership will sort of inform my opinion. If you're going to get another slate where Quickley's really, really popular because he's starting, I think it is a reasonable spot to look elsewhere and just hope that, he is mediocre because he's playing a lot of his minutes with Randle. If you get a situation where it's just like, 14-game slate, everyone's going to go everywhere else, you're still getting 34, 35 minutes of Emmanuel Quickley.
Yeah, and then also keep in mind that this is only under the assumption that Quentin Grimes be ruled out, because he's questionable right now. If he plays, no real need to consider Quentin Grimes. And then as far as the pay-up options on the Knicks go, we've got Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett. Do any of them really stand out to you for this 14-gamer?
The minutes are nice. You got 46 minutes from RJ Barrett last game. Normally without Obi Toppin, you've been getting like 42 in competitive games, which is still a lot. And then, the 46 obviously is just insane, but 6,800 for him, that's never going to be like a huge priority. It's just going to be a kind of like Tobias Harris, like a last piece in type of guy. Julius Randle's up to 9,700. He's playing big minutes without Obi Toppin as well. You got 40 from him last game. I think the price tag is getting to where it's pretty much correct, though. The only salaries that really stand out to me are Jalen Brunson at 7,100. That's just a really cheap price point for someone that is playing more minutes now that Derrick Rose isn't in the rotation. I mean, last game he was in the rotation. That's because Grimes was out. But you've seen Brunson's playing time increase. And then also Mitchell Robinson coming in at 5,300. When he avoids foul trouble, you're seeing 30-plus minutes from him, but he's a center, and so you can only prioritize him so much. I think Jalen Brunson's clearly the top option from the Knicks here.
So let's move on to the next game, the Detroit Pistons taking on the Atlanta Hawks. And we've got a chalk play here from Detroit, even though there are no injuries in the mix here for the team other than, Cade Cunningham, but that's kind of adjusted for at this point. Jaden Ivey, $5,300 on DraftKings, is projected for 22% ownership. On FanDuel, he's projected for 12% ownership at $5,900. But considering the size of the slate, Jaden Ivey is actually currently one of the 5 most popular players on DraftKings. What do you make of a chalk Jaden Ivey?
So my initial reaction was that it was kind of funny because we were getting really low owned Jaden Ivey. He kept playing poorly. Then he plays well, and suddenly, he jumps from 5% owned to 20% owned. But there has actually been a change as well. You had seen Ivey for a while just like struggling to get more than 26, 27 minutes in a game. 3 games ago, 28 minutes against Brooklyn. 2 games ago, 33 against Utah. Last game against Philly, 34 minutes for Jaden Ivey. So you didn't see Corey Joseph in the rotation last game. That's a big difference. Now, Amadou Diallo did play a bit. Diallo played 6.5 minutes in the first half. He played 5.5 in the second half. But you had been getting rotations where Corey Joseph was playing 16 to 18 minutes off the bench. Alec Burks was playing like 20 to 22 minutes off the bench. That only leaves so many minutes for Killian Hayes and Jaden Ivey. If you're going to kick Corey Joseph out of the rotation and make Amadou Diallo give him some minutes, but not as many as Joseph had been playing, that opens up more run for Jaden Ivey, and you can very easily get him back to that 30 to 32 minute average that we were seeing earlier in the year, and then getting increased production without Cade Cunningham. So I do actually not really have a problem with this ownership, since there was an actual change in this rotation, and there is reason to expect Ivey to play more minutes here outside of just, he did it the last couple of games. You saw that rotation change that actually does open some minutes up.
And then as for the rest of this team, is there anything else that's even really a talking point? I know Bojan has had his individual upside, but hard to consider him when he's expensive on a 14-game slate. Duren also has shown some upside as of late, but he's also seen an increase in price. Going to be hard to consider him when he's only center eligible on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Is there any other talking points for you, anything that does stand out from the Pistons?
No, not really. I mean, Jalen Duren, we know he rebounds really well. He's going to project as a good point per dollar option. If you want to get a little bit at center, fine. He's pulling 5% ownership. The ceiling that Bogdanovic has, but I just don't think I'm going to end up really getting there on this slate. Ivey's the only one that really stands out to me.
From the Hawks side of the game, Clint Capella, questionable. He's missed the last few games, and we've seen Okongwu move into the starting lineup. Now, Okongwu, to me, went way overowned in the last game that the Hawks played as the starting center, because he had a couple of mediocre to bad starts as a value play, and people just jumped off him entirely. But I think we do have to look past just this year of starts for Okongwu, because he was good as a starter last year. So I think that there was a little bit too much weighting of the starts that he made this season, because if Okongwu is going to start, by the way, he played 40 minutes last game, which is just an insane workload. If Clint Capella's out, I'm going to play Okongwu, and I assume he's not going to be too popular again.
Yeah, if Capella's out and Okongwu was starting, which I expect that he would in this matchup, we saw them. We saw Collins start at the 5 2 games ago. Then Okongwu got to start last game. Against a Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart frontcourt, it just makes all the sense in the world to go with Collins and Okongwu in the starting lineup if Capella's out. At 5,400, he's going to look pretty good. Again, you have plenty of other similar options. You have Mitchell Robinson, you have Jalen Duren, you have, I'm sure, plenty of other guys we're going to talk about. But since the start of last year, Okongwu has started 8 games where Trae Young has been active, 9 games where Trae Young has been active. He's averaged 0.83 DraftKings points per minute in 31.8 minutes per game. I think you project, around 32 minutes. He does see a drop off in production playing with Trae Young, but he's still cheap enough that he's going to look like a pretty solid value in a good spot. I would definitely be interested in what the ownership does. If you get, coming off of that big game last time out, if you get another situation where it's just like everybody slamming in Onyeka Okongwu, then there are a lot of guys that you can pivot to. But if it's just, Okongwu's getting 5 to 10% ownership, I would think he's a very good play if he's starting.
Yeah, and if you guys haven't done it yet, do us a favor by liking the video and subscribing to the YouTube channel. As pay-up options, Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, are either of them going to be appealing for you on this one?
I think they both look good, but they're both just sort of in that mix where there's a lot of guards that are going to look really good on this slate. You have Young coming in at 10-2, Murray coming in at 8,700. DeJounte Murray last game played 40 minutes, so we've just seen massive minutes from him since he came back from his injury. That's going to make him project relatively well, even though clearly his production comes down when he plays alongside Trae Young. But both of those guys are, I think, plays you're happy to get to, but not plays you're building around. They're both pulling about 3% ownership.
And then any other role players to talk about here? One thing that is pretty tricky is that I don't know what to make of John Collins' minutes, because before last game, he said he was going to play bigger minutes, and then he just didn't. So Collins ended up playing 21 minutes last game. He played 20 minutes the game before. So I guess technically, sure, he played one more minute, but hard to count on him for big minutes right now.
I actually think he's pretty interesting because so he was in foul trouble in the first half. He played 4 minutes to open the game, picked up 2 fouls, went to the bench, came back in, played 5 minutes and 28 seconds, didn't close the first half. You see that happen, often when guys are kind of on the fringe of foul trouble. Like, they don't want John Collins picking up his third foul with 2 minutes to go in the half. So he didn't close the half. But then he came out, he played 10 minutes and 36 seconds in the third quarter. If that's going to be what his actual rotation is, then he's going to play 30 plus minutes here if they're going to go that route. He only played a minute in the fourth quarter. He didn't close the game. They went with Bogdanovich over him, which that's a real risk. I think that as far as the closing lineup goes, you're going to have 2 of Bogdanovich, Okongwu / Capella, and Collins. So that's, I guess you also could see where, maybe Hunter doesn't close and Collins does. So there's going to be plenty of times Collins does close, but other times he doesn't. I think at 5,300 in a good matchup, it is sort of interesting just based on really that third quarter rotation where nobody's going to go there because he's played 20 and 21 minutes. If he plays 30 or 32 minutes at 5,300, he's actually going to look pretty good.
Yeah, no, I could get behind the logic. I should have looked more into how his minutes were allocated last game because, I think the way you laid it out there, it's not impossible for John Collins to get up to 30 minutes and $5,300 on DraftKings. If I give him more minutes in an event that Clint Capella was to be ruled out, he probably wouldn't end up looking like a bad play. So I might be underestimating his minutes. Anything else you want to talk about from the Hawks?
No.
All right, so let's move on to the Minnesota Timberwolves against the Boston Celtics. I wouldn't really call it a conspiracy theory, but just a general theory about the Timberwolves injury report. Rudy Gobert is listed as questionable with an ankle injury. He missed a couple games with an ankle injury, but he returned last game. I think this is just a stale injury report. I don't actually think Gobert is at that much risk of missing the game, but since he is listed as questionable, number one, how realistic do you think he is that he doesn't play? And what would we do with Naz Reid if he draws another start at center?
Yeah, so I'm with you in that I expect Gobert to play. Not only did he play, he played 38.2 minutes. I think he's probably fine. It's also the same injury on the injury report, the left ankle sprain. So yeah, I'm with you in that. I think he's good to go, and he's going to look like a reasonable center option at 7,300. Not a good matchup against Boston, but pretty cheap price tag for him, knowing that he can play, 38 minutes. I was surprised that he did play that much because, one, it was his first game back, but two, Naz Reid had played so well in his absence. I thought maybe you would get just a little bit more playing time for Reid by design, but they didn't go that route. So at 7,300, certainly would have some interest in Gobert. If he is out for whatever reason, Naz Reid coming in at 5,300 would just once again be a very, very, very easy play.
Yeah, and they did play Naz Reid and Rudy Gobert together for a couple of minutes last game, but I don't think that's anything that's going to be too significant in the grand scheme of things. Not anything that would certainly make me want to play Naz Reid at his elevated price point. But we do also have Kyle Anderson listed as questionable. And Anderson, to me, is a more reasonable player being listed as questionable because he sat out the last couple of games. If Anderson sits again, is there anybody that benefits enough for the Timberwolves that you'd want to play on a 14-game slate?
Probably not. Jaden Daniels is 4,300. You could give him a couple of more minutes, but those aren't even guaranteed. He played 32 minutes last game, did lose a couple minutes to foul trouble, but I think you could go from projecting 32 minutes to 34 for McDaniels, but still wouldn't really make him look like a priority on a 14-gamer. Jalen Noel maybe picks up a couple more minutes, goes from 22, 23 to 24 to 26, but again, 14-gamer, so nothing that I would call a priority.
And then as for Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell, are either of them appealing as pay-up options?
I like the D'Angelo Russell price tag in particular at 7,200. His salary dropped a little bit, and he's just playing huge minutes without Jordan McLaughlin, who is currently still ruled out. Again, if we're going under the theory that this is an injury report from 2 games ago, then that could change, I guess. But assuming he's still out, Russell's playing a ton of minutes. So I do like that price tag, even in the difficult matchup. For Anthony Edwards, I think it's more difficult. That the ceiling is certainly there, but he's pretty expensive at 9,200. Tough matchup. You do have Gobert back, which doesn't really impact Edwards' rates, but it has impacted his true shooting percentage, which I do buy into just because you have worse spacing and it makes it more difficult for him to, get to the rim. So I do think D'Angelo Russell looks pretty good along with Gobert, though.
On the other side of the game, the Boston Celtics, Marcus Smart is listed as questionable. So Smart did not play in Boston's last game. And here's what Boston ended up doing. They started Peyton Pritchard, which I was stunned by. I did not have any sort of expectation that Peyton Pritchard was going to start, but he only played 17 and a half minutes. So we got Pritchard backcourt alongside Derek White. 17 and a half minutes for Pritchard, 26 and a half minutes for Derek White. And then we had Brogdon play 30 minutes off the bench. If Smart sits again, is that more or less the minutes allotment that you would be expecting?
Yeah, I really wish they just hadn't started Pritchard because basically White played the minutes I expected. Brogdon played the minutes I expected. Like, I had the rotation minutes-wise correct. And then they announced Pritchard starting, and I was like, I guess I have to give him some more minutes, and ended up getting to him, and he was absolutely awful. So that really sucked. I don't know if they'll start him again. It was weird that they started him there. Like, he's not a very good replacement for Marcus Smart, I don't think. When you have Jaylen Brown healthy and you have Jason Tatum healthy, you don't need another guy that can, create and score. You need somebody that defends. And so I was surprised that they went that route. But I don't know. If he starts, I would assume that you're getting like 18-ish minutes again. If he plays well, you could get more. But I would still expect that you're getting those, 26 to 28 minutes from Derek White if Marcus Smart is out. Or really either way, and 28 to 30 from Malcolm Brogdon.
Also, just an insanely curious stretch by the Boston Celtics, who were mowing down everybody in the NBA. And then all of a sudden they have this stretch, 3 home losses in a row, 2 of them to Orlando Magic, 1 to the Indiana Pacers. They've win over the Los Angeles Lakers because everybody beats the Lakers. And then they get blown out by the Clippers and the Warriors. So a horrendous stretch by the Celtics that kind of came out of nowhere because they were just in total cruise control, it seemed like.
On a side note, did you see the John Morant interview about the Celtics? Well, not about
what
the
did he say?
They asked him, what's the one team that when he looks at film that he's just like, man, we're gonna have to get through those guys. And he said the Celtics, and they were like, the Celtics, so nobody in the West. And he's like, nah, I'm good in the West.
This is, I definitely think the Eastern Conference is way stronger than the West this year. But yeah, number one, that is really funny. But then also, I can't figure out what the hell is going on with the Celtics right now because they're losing to the worst teams in the NBA at home after they looked untouchable for the first couple months of the year. But Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, are either of them appealing as pay-up options?
Sure. They're just kind of in the same situation that they always are when they're both active, where they're correctly priced. We've gotten Jaylen Brown up to 9,500, Tatum at 10,800. They both have really high ceilings, but I don't think there's a ton of value there.
Yeah, and then even in chat, Andrew Jennison saying the Celtics suck when Smart is out. They lost to the Magic in back-to-back games at home with Smart active.
Yeah.
And overall this year, they've played 1, 2, 3. They played 4 games without Marcus Smart, and they're 3-1 in those games. So I don't even think that's what it is. It's just a really, really weird downstretch for whatever reason. Maybe they just got a little lackadaisical. But either way, we'll move on to the next game. But first, if you guys have not checked out all the tools we have at Stokastic.com, you get a 3-day free trial by clicking on the link that we have below. It's also about to be thrown into the YouTube chat. You'll get our player projections, ownership projections, and all the other tools that we have, like the lineup generator, the boom bust tool. It's going to be the best way to help you make money while you're playing DFS. And it's no risk to yourself. You just trial it 3 days for free by clicking on the link we have below. And it's also not only going to cover NBA, also NFL. So you're going to get access to today's NBA slate. You're going to get access to Saturday's NFL slate because we've got a main slate for Saturday. And then NBA, you're getting the big Sunday Christmas NBA slate. So lots of good value if you take advantage of our 3-day free trial right now. The next game that we have to talk about is the Milwaukee Bucks against the Brooklyn Nets. And As far as the Bucks go, we've got Chris Middleton is once again doubtful. He's missed a bunch of time this year. Assuming that Middleton is out again, how high of a priority does that make Giannis as a pay-up option?
I mean, it's Giannis, and it's a good spot, so he's going to look good, but it's the same issue that you always run into. He's $12,200. You have basically every player in the NBA playing today, so you're going to have so many guys that are $2,000-$3,000 less expensive. It's just likely that 1, 2, 3 of them have 60 plus fantasy point games, just because that's how things work. And so you're going to need, on a 14 game slate, you're most likely going to need like 75, 80 from Giannis. And so it just ends up being a spot where he's not really different than other players when you factor in the salary. Like, he's going to hit 75, 80 fantasy points a relatively high percentage of the time, but at the same frequency that these other guys are going to hit 60, 65. So I don't think I'll end up getting to that much unless we just get so much value across the board that you can just kind of like easily fit him in along with other good plays.
And is there anything else that we should be looking at from Milwaukee?
I think Holiday at 8,200 is the most interesting piece to me. He's averaged about 1.2 DraftKings points per minute in the games with Giannis and without Middleton this year. You should get 34, 35 minutes from him. I think he's actually my favorite guy from the Bucks.
And on the other side of the game, we got the chalky Kevin Durant game last time out where it looked like he was going to crush against the Golden State Warriors. But here was the issue. The Warriors were down, if I'm not mistaken, the score at halftime was 91-51 in that game. The Nets put up 91 points in the first half, and then Durant basically didn't have to play all that much in the second half. Didn't end up playing in the fourth quarter. So we got a big Kevin Durant game as far as points per minute goes, but ultimately only had to play 29 minutes. But because of that spot where Kyrie Irving was resting, we've now seen a price increase for Kevin Durant, which I think is going to make it hard to get to him on a slate of this size with Kyrie expected to play.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough to get to much of anything from this team. So we had talked about it prior to last game because we didn't have the Kyrie being out news yet. In the 2 games before the last one, you've gotten really, really weird rotations from Brooklyn where Jacque Vaughn's played 11 guys in the first half. They've gotten behind, and then he cuts the rotation down to 8 guys in the second half. And the result has just been that you're not getting as many minutes from Ben Simmons or Nick Claxton as you probably should or could if he wasn't going to play that many guys. I think sooner than later, you see that rotation cut down to something normal, whether it's, 9 guys or kind of 9.5, where somebody, a 10th guy plays like 8 minutes or something. But it makes it really tough to project the minutes on guys like Simmons and Claxton. And at 5,900 for Claxton, center only, the opportunity cost is high. 6,200 with power forward eligibility for Simmons. If you told me Ben Simmons was going to play 32 minutes, I would certainly be interested here at 6,200. But while I think it's possible he does, there's certainly no guarantee that happens. And then now you just have so many other good plays as well. It's tough to get there. You have Durant playing with Kyrie and vice versa. So clearly they both have high ceilings, but their median projections are pretty much just in line with their salaries.
Yeah, and I do find this to be a pretty unappealing team. So is there anything else you want to talk about from the Nets?
No.
So let's move on to the New Orleans Pelicans against the Oklahoma City Thunder. And one thing I'm going to mention here, Zion Williamson is listed as questionable. If he plays, I'm going to be instantly betting the Pelicans. They're currently underdogs to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So books are expecting that Zion isn't going to play. As a result, OKC favored by 2.5 points. We've got Zion listed as questionable. We've got Larry Nance listed as questionable. Brandon Ingram remains out for this team. So Zion in the health and safety protocols, I do think he's more likely to sit than play, but we should once again note that he's officially listed as questionable. But if there is no Zion on the mix for New Orleans, are we looking to get to CJ McCollum again? Who else would stand out?
Yeah, I mean, you're going right back to CJ McCollum, I think. His salary did jump. He's up to 8,300. But, we kind of saw the ceiling. When CJ McCollum actually knocks down shots, he's going to do that. And, the average production for him without Zion and Ingram has still been a little bit over a fantasy point per minute, even on his god-awful shooting. So it's just, again, he's going to project really, really well. You run the risk of him playing like he has most of the year and not knocking down shots, but so many opportunities there that it's just going to be really difficult to get away from if Zion is out. Trey Murphy only played 28 minutes last game, which was surprising. Najee Marshall played 25. They ran a deeper rotation than I anticipated. I didn't think that you would get Jackson Hayes minutes at the 4, but you did. So that took some minutes off of Marshall and Murphy and those peripheral pieces. They would still look like solid values here if Zion's out. But their price tags, especially, Marshall's up to 4,400. That's a bump in price. Jones jumped to 4,700. Murphy's still at 46. So I think out of those wing guys, Murphy would be the one I like the most if Zion's out. Obviously, you'd go to McCollum a lot. If Zion and Nance are both out, you can go right back to Joe Val at 6,300. He'd still look really good. And you can go right back to a 3K flat Billy Hernangomez as well. I would say, so yesterday I played, and it ended up kind of biting me, but I was fine playing Joe Val and Hernangomez in the same lineup. I ended up with 100% Joe Val and then still getting 3x the field on Hernangomez. With this being a 14-game slate, I would not really want them in the same lineup just because for the true ceiling game from Hernangomez, if he gets 22, 23 minutes, you're talking 25, 26 for Joe Val. And in that case, I would rather just have a different center since there's 27 other ones to pick from.
And then in the event that Zion does return, what would that do to the other guys on the Pelicans? Because my initial thought is just there isn't really anything I would be getting to.
Yeah, I mean, if Zion comes back, it makes everybody look worse. If Larry Nance is out, Joe Val would still look pretty good. If Larry Nance is in, then not really interested there either. If Nance and Zion are in, I don't have much interest at all in the Pels.
And on the other side of the game, we've got SGA back, Josh Giddey is back. The players that are listed as out is Ousmane Dieng, Jalen Williams, the Jalen with a Y, and then we've got Jeremiah Robinson are also out. So for OKC, for me as of late, it's mainly been SGA or bust, and I don't really think that tonight's slate is any different.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. This team getting bodies back, and we know when OKC has bodies, they play bodies, and it's just bad for everybody. So 6,800 for Giddey, sure. 10-1 for SGA, sure. Kind of surprised Dort's getting 10% ownership, but that's kind of been the case on a lot of these small forwards, so it kind of just tells me that it's a difficult position to fill out right now, and you're just getting mediocre plays falling in there. That'll probably drop off once we start getting some other value. But SGA and Giddey are the guys that you can feel relatively good about from OKC as usual. Jalen Williams has been playing a lot of minutes, but also basically like a 0.75 fantasy point per minute guy. Just not going to project all that well.
Yeah, and as Marcus Amparo notes in our YouTube chat, Trey Mann was just recalled from the G League. So I don't know if he's going to play or not, but it's just somebody else you have to have as a headache in that potential rotation for OKC. So none of the role players could we really be getting to there. The next spot to talk about here is the Dallas Mavericks against the Houston Rockets. So Luka, I think, is one of the top pay up options for the slate. If we were to ignore salary, if somebody was just to ask me, who do I think scores the most fantasy points today? I would say the answer is Luka Doncic. But Adam, does that mean that we're going to want to pay up for him tonight?
Same answer as Giannis, basically, except for I always think Luka looks a little bit better just because he does typically play more minutes than Giannis. You also have a very, very good matchup here against Houston. But it's just, we've already talked about so many guards that, it's just like, oh, well, they look pretty good, but there's also, all these other guards. Now you get Luka, who also looks great, but, is really expensive at 12.5. So very, very similar to Giannis. I do think if I had to, just pick one of them, I would get to Luka first.
And then in the front court, it looks like Christian Wood could be the starter for now because we got Dwight Powell back last game. But even with Powell back and Maxi Kleber out, we saw Christian Wood stick in the starting lineup. Now, Wood didn't play a massive amount of minutes, but part of that was also because he didn't play well. So only got 28 minutes out of Christian Wood. But assuming that he is the starter for now, is Christian Wood somebody that's appealing in tournaments?
In tournaments, yeah. So the price tag is not very friendly at 7,700, but I still just think there's so much volatility in his playing time that, and the fact that he has power forward eligibility, that he is appealing in tournaments. Because if you get a rotation like last game where he plays 27, 28 minutes and Dwight Powell just plays the other 20, you're not going to really be happy you played Christian Wood more times than not. But if he plays well, there's no reason he can't play more minutes. Like, I can't imagine they actually care if they play Dwight Powell 21 minutes or if they play him 14 minutes. It can't make a difference to them. If Christian Wood is out there just knocking down shots and playing really well, there's no reason he can't get 33, 34 minutes. So I think he kind of controls his own fate, which is always really nice for DFS. When you get these guys where it's just like, well, if he's playing poorly, he's not going to get enough minutes to be a good play, but if he's playing poorly, he wasn't a good play anyway. But if he is playing well, there's nobody forcing him off the floor. I don't think Dwight Powell is an actual issue here. Outside of if Dwight Powell were out, there's just nobody else. So Wood would obviously play all those minutes. But I think in tournaments, he's still interesting. If he starts again, I would project like 30 to 32 minutes, and I assume he'd be very low owned. So I would probably get a little bit.
There aren't that many players active for the Mavericks right now because Dorian Finney-Smith is out, Kemba Walker's resting, Josh Green is out, Maxi Kleber is out. And then you've got Jaden Hardy and Tyler Dorsey both in the G League right now. It's just kind of a shortened rotation, which is why Christian Wood we've seen play some bigger minutes. But does that make anybody else appealing in the Mavericks rotation?
Spencer Dinwiddie is appealing, and I already know how this is going to go because I said last slate that Dinwiddie was appealing because of how shorthanded they were. I played him at like 1% ownership. He played 41 minutes and he sucked. And now today at 6,600, he's projected for 10% ownership. He's probably just going to go out there and torch Houston, and it's going to really make me mad he didn't do it at 1%. But the minutes were there. You know, I had projected him for 34 last game. He averages about 32 in the games he's played with Luka this year. I'd given him a couple extra minutes because of this team being shorthanded. But he went out there and played 41. Now, I'm clearly not projecting that again, but I expect you're getting 34, 36 minutes on average from Dinwiddie, and that's just going to make him look like a pretty good option at that price tag.
And now there's a crazy amount of chalk on the other side of the game, like a really crazy amount of chalk. Because for the Houston Rockets, on a 14-game slate, there aren't that many popular players. We've got the most popular player on the slate right now, that was Tari Eason, projected for 44% ownership on DraftKings. KJ Martin, who was just named the starter, he's going to be starting for Houston today. He's projected for 43% ownership. There are only 3 other players even projected for north of 20% ownership on DraftKings today. And then over on FanDuel, KJ Martin projected for 48% ownership. Tari Eason projected for 28% ownership. Now, I understand Garrison Matthews is questionable. Eric Gordon has been ruled out. This seems like an insane amount of ownership for a slate of this size.
Yeah, particularly with regard to Tari Eason. So KJ Martin, did you say he was already announced the starter?
Yes, KJ Martin's going to start.
I'll say I assumed he would start. He's 3,700. He's not a bad point per minute guy, and he's also not somebody that relies on usage to get there. So him moving into the starting lineup isn't that concerning. Like, he just does enough in the way of rebounding. He's efficient because he scores around the rim. But he's at 0.84 DraftKings points per minute overall this season. If you put him on the floor with Jalen Green just to try and get a sense of, you know, what his production looks like alongside the starters, it's taking forever to load. But you've gotten 0.87 DraftKings points per minute. Like, you're just getting very similar production because he does it in ways that aren't really impacted negatively by the starters. So I think he looks like good value. And we've kind of touched on how small forward's an ugly position today. You keep seeing ownership going to these guys that don't really look that good. So I think that ownership on KJ Martin makes sense. Like, yeah, it's probably too high in terms of optimal percentage versus ownership, but in terms of just getting a cheap piece that looks good into your lineup so that you can play these really high upside, lower owned guys elsewhere, I think he makes a lot of sense. Tari Eason here does not. 3,500 for Tari Eason. I understand why people would play him. He's going to play around 20 minutes. He's over a fantasy point per minute guy. He'd be a really, really good play if he were low owned. I think this is a situation of him being projected for minutes that he's not going to get. Eric Gordon has no impact on Tari Eason. Tari Eason is not playing the 3, and neither is Jabari Smith. So the only way Tari Eason gets more minutes, and we have seen this a little bit recently, is if you play one of Tari Eason or Jabari Smith at the 5. You take minutes away from Bruno Fernando, you put Jabari Smith at the 5 alongside Tari Eason, or vice versa, whatever. And then you can get, Jabari Smith playing his 30 to 32 and Tari Eason playing like 22 to 24. If that happens, you're going to really want Tari Eason. But my big issue here is the ownership, because I don't think that's happening all that often. And Eric Gordon being out has nothing to do with it. Like, you can't look at this and say, oh, Eric Gordon's out, so some of those minutes go to Tari Eason. You're getting, at the 4 and the 5, the minutes are Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Alperen Şengün, Bruno Fernando, Usman Garuba. Not Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon does not play minutes there, and none of those guys are playing the 3. So it's just a matter of, does Tari Eason / Jabari Smith get minutes at the 5? Does Jabari Smith get in foul trouble and Eason plays more? There are ways Eason gets there, but this is a spot where he is getting way too much ownership because I'm assuming he's just being projected for more minutes than you actually should be projecting him for.
Yeah, and it's something we've seen. The Rockets they've had different guys out over the course of the season, and we just never really see those minutes go to Tari Eason. He's played more than 24 minutes once the entire season, and some of the recent games for Eason, 21 minutes, 24, 23, 16, 19, 13. If you're playing cash games right now, yeah, he's not, because he's so cheap, he's not a bad points per dollar play. It's just too much ownership. For him to be 44% owned on a 14-game slate I'm curious to see where that ends up being later on today. So, like the video, check out the deep dive that we're doing later on today, live before lock. Because if this ownership holds, this is just somebody I'm not going to have interested in large field tournaments.
Yeah, and so like I look to see where we have him projected, or in our first run, because I have like this is probably what's influencing it. We have him at 24 minutes. We have Jabari Smith at 27. We have Garuba in. We have Fernando in. We have Şengün playing his normal minutes. That's just going to be too many minutes. So this is something that probably just gets adjusted throughout the day. But if sites, like I'm sure ours will be adjusted, but if other sites don't make that adjustment, and this is actually what projections on Tari Eason look like elsewhere in the industry later in the day, he's just going to be too popular. Like right now, we have 99 and a half minutes going to that group of 5, and it's going to be 96 minutes. So that's sort of the issue is, I know ours will get adjusted, but if the industry consensus is just like, oh, we're just going to throw these minutes out and not pay any attention to what positions people play, then you're going to get too much ownership coming in Eason. The follow-up here, though, and I said it at the beginning, if we get closer to lock and Tari Eason's like 2% owned, he is actually a decent tournament play because he's 3,400. And if anything happens to Jabari Smith, or that you get that favorable rotation where they play alongside each other, he actually can be a good play. It's just that this ownership is insane right now.
Next game, here's the Indiana Pacers against the Miami Heat. For the Pacers, potential massive injury news because Tyrese Halliburton is questionable. Aaron Nesmith is questionable. If Halliburton doesn't play, if Nesmith doesn't play, big void to fill for the Indiana Pacers. Who would look like the best options?
Sorry, so you said if Halliburton and Nesmith both miss?
Yeah, Halliburton and Nesmith both questionable as of now.
Yeah, so I mean, you would most likely get TJ McConnell in the starting lineup, looking like a really good value. I don't know if they would go back to Jalen Smith in place of Nesmith or if they would go to O'Shea Brissett. You could move Chris Duarte into the starting lineup. You could move Mathurin into the starting lineup. So there's a lot of ways you could replace Nesmith since he's sort of just a random body that can be replaced by anybody. But I expect that you would get McConnell in place of Halliburton, and McConnell is just $3,200.
Yeah, and then also Andrew Nembhard. We've seen him have success in games that Halliburton's been out this year. Also, quick update, Marcus Smart was just upgraded from questionable to probable, so we could take out any of the potential consideration for value guards from the Boston Celtics. But back to the Pacers, if Halliburton ends up playing, is there anything that would really stand out from Indiana?
Not really. Difficult matchup. One other thing to mention, Nembhard has been good without Halliburton this year, like you said. TJ McConnell was out also, so keep in mind that, Nembhard certainly looks better if Halliburton is out, but McConnell will cut into those assist numbers a bit. If Halliburton is in, especially the Halliburton's one that really matters, I don't think there's much that stands out. Miles Turner's down to 6,600, so that's an appealing high upside option. Nembhard's down to 4,200, but if everybody's in, you're probably getting like 28 minutes. He's getting 15% ownership right now, which seems a little bit high. So yeah, I don't think there's a ton that I like here.
And on the other side of the Miami Heat, they're tightening up their injury report a little bit after they got fined by the NBA. I know they had the day after they got fined where they kind of tried to stick it to the NBA by listing all 16 players on the roster on the injury report. For today, though, Caleb Martin's questionable, Gabe Vincent is questionable, Haslam is questionable, and those are all players that I actually think are legitimately questionable. There's none of the bullshit that they've had on the injury report as of late, but I also don't really think there's anything that's all that appealing for Miami because they've had so many guys out and they actually have the core guys, Lowry, Hero, Butler, Adebayo, all expected to play today.
So one thing I wanted to mention real quick, because I just noticed it on Indiana. I wanted to go back and check last game. Right now we have Jalen Smith projected for 8% ownership with a 19% chance of being optimal at 3,800. That's going to come down, or it should. He did play 21 minutes last game. He was the straight backup to Miles Turner again. So it's just a situation where unless Miles Turner is going to continue playing 26 minutes, you can't expect that many minutes for Jalen Smith. So, it's just that backup center situation for him where if Turner gets in foul trouble, Smith's going to look fine. But there wasn't like a rotation change there other than that he was the backup center. Isaiah Jackson left the rotation. So like that's beneficial for Smith because in previous games, he hadn't even been that. But still just purely the backup to Miles Turner. As far as the Miami side goes, good matchup for them. And you're still getting a condensed rotation from this team. But assuming that, you have Butler back, he's probable. Lowry's not on the injury report. So you're back to full strength here, we assume. Nothing's really going to stand out. If you get to some Adebayo, fine. If you get to some, 37 minutes of Tyler Hero, fine. But I think everybody's pretty much correctly priced, if not a little bit overpriced for Miami, now that they're back to full strength.
Yeah, and moving on to the next game, another team that's going to be pretty close to full strength, the Portland Trailblazers. Justice Winslow is doubtful, but he doesn't really move the needle all that much from this team. We've got Damian Lillard probable, Yusuf Nurkic probable. This to me is not a particularly appealing team to get to, but would you like to try to talk me into any of the Trailblazers?
No, it's kind of just been how it's been for the Blazers for a while now. When, for the most part, they're healthy. Nobody really pulling much ownership. Josh Hart leading the way at 7.5%. Just another small forward in that mid 5K price range, which seems to be really useful for roster construction. Jeremy Grant's down to 6,900, so he's pulling 7%. But you have 3% coming into Nurk and Lillard, 2% to Simons, who is also down to 6,900. I do like the price tags on Nurkic and Simons. Simons has been just shy of a fantasy point per minute guy when he's played with Lillard this year, but should still give you 34, 35 minutes. Nurkic at 6,400 should be out there for 30 minutes or so. Winslow not playing does help to solidify his Nurkic's minutes as well. He only played 23 minutes last game, but I'm not reading too much into that. Again, especially with Winslow being out. I don't really know what the reason was. It wasn't foul trouble, but I think you should get 28 to 30 from Nurkic here. So interesting tournament plays, but still nothing I'm really building around. Same can be said for Dame. He's playing 36 plus minutes. If he starts doing what Dame does and just knocking down shots from everywhere on the floor, then he's going to be great, but he's also a little bit overpriced for his median projection.
So let's talk about Denver on the other side of the game, because I do think we have some interesting stuff going on here. Jamal Murray is questionable. I tend to think he's going to play. He was out due to injury management last game and still listed as questionable with injury management. I think he's more likely to play than not. But Michael Porter Jr. is also listed as questionable. And Michael Porter Jr. has not played in a very long time. The last time we saw Michael Porter Jr. active was November 22nd. So it's been a month. He would be on a minutes restriction if he comes back.
Maybe.
But he's still a fairly high usage guy. And we did see Jokic not have quite the same upside at the start of the year because he had to share the ball with guys like Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray. So obviously this doesn't totally neuter Jokic, but I would be a little bit concerned about his upside if Porter plays and starts.
Yeah, I agree with you. In the games that Jokic has played with both Jamal Murray and Michael Porter, he's played 13 games. Would help if I searched for Jokic's stats instead of Porter's. He's played 12 games, 1.6 DraftKings points per minute. So still obviously really good. But in the games where Michael Porter has been out and Jamal Murray has been in, I think Jokic is at like 1.8 DraftKings points per minute, 1.9. 1.9 DraftKings points per minute. You have seen Jokic play more minutes recently, which has been nice, but clearly he's a good play. But with Porter, assuming Porter's back and starting, it does make him look a little bit worse. I am really interested to see what happens with Porter. I'm not sure if you saw the reporting on it yesterday, but Michael Malone answered questions, said Porter's very close to returning, could be back tomorrow, talking about today, or next game. When he comes back, he will be on a minutes restriction. Then Michael Porter answered questions, said, I am playing tomorrow and I will not be restricted. So I don't know. But I'm assuming that he is on a minutes restriction. But yeah, who knows? It doesn't seem that they're really on the same page with Michael Porter's health right now. But him coming back does just sort of make everything look worse. It's going to kick Bruce Brown out of the starting lineup. I'm interested to see what it does to Aaron Gordon's production, because Aaron Gordon had also been playing better without Michael Porter Jr. And it seems from interviews with Aaron Gordon like it's almost like a switch flipped. And Gordon just like realized he's a good offensive player and he can play more offense. But with Porter coming back, I expect that you see the production come down a bit from Gordon. So really it's Jokic and Jamal Murray, assuming Murray's in, as the guys that I would expect to get to here, but still not going to look like priorities just because I think Porter does have enough of a negative impact and they're expensive enough that they're just pretty much correctly priced.
More injury news in the next game with a potential key player coming back. For the Memphis Grizzlies, Desmond Bane has been so good this year when he's been healthy. And we've seen a lot of added production go to Ja Morant when Desmond Bane has not been on the court. And we haven't really seen the Grizzlies fully healthy this year. We haven't seen them with Morant, Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Dillon Brooks, all these guys active. If Bane returns, my initial reaction is that this kind of kills a lot of the fantasy potential for this team.
I think so as well. Like you said, we haven't gotten all three of Morant, Bane, Jackson yet. In 11 games with Desmond Bane this year, 1.48 DraftKings points per minute for Morant. In 14 games without him, 1.57. But, again, that's when you had Bane there, you had Santi Aldama instead of Jaren Jackson, who's a high usage guy. So I think it's going to, I think the Grizzlies are insanely good. I think it's going to be kind of messy from a fantasy standpoint until these prices sort of recalibrate. John Morant clearly is always going to be capable of just going out there and putting up a massive game. But the more minutes Desmond Bane is playing, the less appealing Morant's going to be from a fantasy standpoint, especially because Memphis doesn't play him a ton of minutes. He plays 33 minutes, give or take, and Bane being back certainly isn't going to make him play more. So I think, Memphis takes a very smart approach in that regard. Like, you're going to have a relatively fresh team in the postseason if you're able to continue just playing Morant 32 to 33 minutes. But you compare him to some of these guys in his price range. You have Trae Young up there who plays 36, 37 minutes. You have Dame up there who can push 40 minutes. I think Morant's in that same mold where he's correctly priced or a little bit overpriced for his median, but you're just going to have those games where he goes nuts. But I think just based on the playing time, you're going to have guys like Trae Young and Damian Lillard and Pascal Siakam in a different position give you those games more frequently than Morant does.
Yeah, and I think Memphis is correct to be cautious with Morant's minutes because he's been a lot more injury prone than I think a lot of people realize. Where John Morant, I think he's already had 3 or 4 knee surgeries at this point in his career. We've seen with numerous ankle injuries that have held him out for a lot of time. He's a really explosive player, and he seemingly only plays at 110%. So yeah, I don't think he's the type of guy you want to be playing 38 minutes per game in regular season games. And that's the way the Grizzlies have approached it, nor do they need to. They're one of the deepest teams in the NBA. So Grizzlies, I do think, are going to be a little cautious with them. And particularly if Bane's back, it's going to make it hard to really pay up for Morant relative to other options. Is there anything else that's a talking point for you from the Grizzlies?
No, not really. I mean, Steven Adams is cheap at 5,100. Jaren Jackson's price tag's come down a bit as well, but I expect Jackson's rates to take a hit if Desmond Bane is back. If Bane is out, Morant, I think, looks fine at 10-4. I think Jackson and Adams both look good, but if Bane is back, I think it's pretty much just taking some shots maybe at a $5,100 Adams, and that's probably about it.
And from the Suns side of the game, no Devin Booker. He is going to be out again. And Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, Mikal Bridges, we've seen all of these guys benefit in the absence of Booker. But are there any priorities for DFS with Booker out?
So, I mean, it makes most of the team look better. Chris Paul coming in at 8,300 still, looks reasonable. You should get 34 plus minutes from him. Cameron Payne's still out as well, so playing time should be there for Paul. I think he looks good. DeAndre Ayton sees a bump in usage. He is almost 8K though. Mikal Bridges sees a bump in usage, but also 6,400. I don't think there's anything that really stands out on a slate of this size, but any of Paul, Ayton, Bridges are good enough plays.
And if you guys haven't taken advantage of the offer that we have with BetMGM, you get 2 free months of Stokastic Plus Platinum when you sign up and make a BetMGM account with our link. And you're going to get added additional value from BetMGM as well, because when you make that account with our link, not only going to get 2 free months Stokastic Plus Platinum, but in addition, a risk-free bet of up to $1,000. So if your first bet at BetMGM is not a winner, refunded up to $1,000 with free bets. So take advantage of the offer. And if you've been looking for a cheap way to get behind our paywall over here, this is the best way to do it. 2 free months Stokastic Plus Platinum when you sign up at BetMGM using that link. Couple games left to talk about. The next one, the Washington Wizards against the Sacramento Kings. This could be an annoying game, Adam, to have as the final one of the slate, because as of right now, Kristaps Porzingis is questionable, Denny Avdija is questionable, Delon Wright is questionable, so he could be back in the mix for them. And then also tail into a back-to-back, so Hachimura, I think, is a rest candidate. Is there anything we could really pull as far as information goes from the Wizards, or do we just need another injury report?
I mean, I think we need their injury report for sure. My guess is that Porzingis comes back, but I have no idea. Like, he missed yesterday with a non-COVID illness, but it would make sense if he was sort of on the fence to just like hold him out yesterday, play him today. But who knows? If he's out, you do get a solid value option in Daniel Gafford. You do have a lot of risk going there, though, because, like we saw yesterday, he doesn't have to play a million minutes. He only played 20. The game before that, he had played 29 as a starter. He's a good point per minute guy, but on a slate of this size, you're back to that situation where even at 4,800, let's say you get 30 or 32 DraftKings points from Daniel Gafford, you're going to get the like flame emoji on DraftKings and feel good about yourself. But you're also probably going to be just giving up 20, 30 raw points at the center position, and it's going to make it difficult. So Gafford would be a good value if he starts, but still would really need to pay a lot of attention to ownership there. It is a good spot against Sacramento. If Porzingis plays, he's 9,100. I would certainly have some appeal there. If he's in, it's a negative for Beal and Kuzma. If he's out, Beal and Kuzma both look better. I agree with you. Rui probably doesn't play. If DeLon Wright is back, you can take a couple minutes off of Monte Morris. There's just a ton of stuff that we're waiting on here.
Yeah, so just one of these spots where check out all the content we have later in the day, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, because I think the Wizards, it could be potential value there, especially because this game, 239.5 total, it's the highest on the slate. We just don't really have a good sense for who's going to be in or out from the Wizards. But from the Sacramento side, Sabonis has been an absolute fantasy monster as of late. The price tag has come up, and we are now seeing him at $10,600 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, $10,200, but does have the added benefit of having power forward and center eligibility. So something I've said a lot over the last couple of weeks. Sabonis, way easier to play on FanDuel than DraftKings. Adam, he's been a beast for DFS purposes lately. Are you willing to use one of your roster spots on a now really expensive Domantas Sabonis?
I would like to. On DraftKings, it's obviously tough because you have the rising price tag and center only. Like he's the same price point as Pascal Siakam, but Siakam has power forward eligibility. But you do have a good matchup here for Sabonis. And the big thing with Sabonis has been his playing time recently. You know, the beginning of the year, you were getting Sabonis in foul trouble a lot, and it was just like, man, is this guy ever going to play, 34, 35 minutes? Now he's just playing 37 plus every single day, as long as, he doesn't get in foul trouble. So that's been something that I think is getting slept on a little bit, is just like how many minutes he is playing when he avoids foul trouble. He's obviously a great point per minute guy. He's averaging about 1.35 DraftKings points per minute. I think he's at least doubled in like 100 straight games or something. It's like, I think realistically it's like 15 or 16. Triple-doubled last game with 21 rebounds. He's just playing out of his mind, playing huge minutes. Even last game, he played 37 and a half minutes. He lost 2.5 minutes to garbage time. So I do think being aggressive with his minutes projection makes sense, and it does make him look good. So I would love to get the Sabonis. It kind of is going to depend on like what center value opens up, because right now I think it's actually a little bit easier to get the Sabonis because we've had a lot of centers where it's just like, oh, well, they're pretty good plays. Mitchell Robinson, Steven Adams, Gobert, Turner, like there's a lot of guys that look fine, but you haven't had a lot of just like, these centers are just phenomenal values. If you get Larry Nance ruled out, if let's say Rudy Gobert actually is questionable and gets ruled out, so Naz Reid steps up, then it starts becoming a lot more difficult to get Sabonis on DraftKings because you're just paying twice as much money for him as for Naz Reid and almost twice as much as for Joval. But, if we just assume things look like they do right now and questionable players are in, Sabonis is actually one of my favorite centers because I don't think that there is as much value at the center position that just glaringly stands out as we've had on other slates recently.
And one final game to talk about, the Charlotte Hornets going up against the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, unfortunately, a lot of injury news in our final games of the slate, which is going to make late swap pretty pertinent for these games. But for Charlotte, Terry Rozier is questionable. He's been out. Dennis Smith Jr. is questionable. He's been out. If these guys return, how could it impact LaMelo Ball, who's been playing out of his mind since getting healthy?
Yeah, so I don't think it should have too much of an impact on LaMelo. Like, the offense is still going to run through him. He hasn't been a crazy high usage guy this year in the sense that, like, he hasn't been getting a lot more usage than he did last season. He's just been around like a 27% usage guy. So far this year, he's at 27.6%. The concern I have with LaMelo is that he's not rebounding at nearly the same clip this year that he was last year. He has a 5.7% rebounding percentage so far this year. Last year, he was up over 10%. Part of it is probably just noise and a small sample, and you see it come up. But the other part, I think, is likely that you're just getting 48 minutes from Mason Plumlee and Nick Richards, whereas last year you were getting some smaller lineups where LaMelo Ball can rebound more. So I am a little bit concerned about his rebounding numbers, but the playing time's been there when he avoids foul trouble. The production's been there. If you want to buy into a narrative, Eric and I were talking about it yesterday. They were down like 25 points going into the fourth quarter against the Clippers in LA last game, and they subbed LaMelo back in. He ended up smashing because he just got a bunch of like bullshit minutes at the end of the game. I don't know if they'll do it again here in LA. Like, obviously he's from the area, so that's the most logical reason for why they ran that weird rotation. I'm not projecting him like crazy different, but is a plus that, I guess even if they get run off the court by the Lakers, maybe they're going to let him go out there and play anyway. But at 9,800, it's just another spot where I think the price tag is where it should be. Pricing's gotten really aggressive on DraftKings the last couple of days, and it's nice to see them sort of start readjusting so you can stop having guys, $1,000 on their price across the board.
Yeah, which FanDuel's been doing fairly well for the last month or so, but DK just had a lot of egregiously mispriced players, and not the case. Like even stuff like Kevin Durant, who's not going to be benefiting from the absence of Kyrie Irving, they gave him a price increase pretty quickly just because Kyrie missed the game. But one final spot to talk about, we have injury news, the Los Angeles Lakers. Obviously, Anthony Davis remains out for this team. Russell Westbrook, though, is going to be returning for the Lakers. But we just mentioned about how players have been getting priced up more aggressively. Well, LeBron is 11,000 on FanDuel. He's 10,900 on DraftKings. Wildly different from when he was a sub 10K player on the last slate and was basically impossible to avoid. How do you like him as a pay-up option without Anthony Davis now that he's 10,900 on DK and 11,000 on FanDuel?
I mean, I still like him. He should play 36 minutes or so. It's a good spot. He's pulling 17% ownership, which I think is reasonable. Without Davis on the floor this year, he's averaged 1.5 DraftKings points per minute. So that's obviously really, really good. You compare him to other guys in this price range, Pascal Siakam, Domantas Sabonis, as good as those guys are, 1.5 fantasy points per minute is better than them. It's better than Trae Young. It's comparable to Morant. So I think LeBron does look good. He also has that small forward eligibility, which is really valuable. So I do like getting there. And, again, the ownership's not too crazy right now. If you were talking about it being like 30, 35%, I'd be like, yeah, okay, I'll take my chances on Siakam, Sabonis, these other guys. But LeBron looks very good here. I think Westbrook's really interesting too at 7,600. I expect that you're going to get at least like 28 to 30 minutes if this game's competitive. Westbrook has averaged 1.28 DraftKings points per minute without Davis on the floor this year. He's been excellent from a fantasy standpoint off the bench. It's always risky paying a price tag in this range to somebody off the bench because, the playing time's just inconsistent. But if this game's competitive, I actually think Westbrook looks like a pretty good option, and he's only pulling 5% ownership. Then you do have Thomas Bryant as another center option at 6,100. Should play 30 to 32 minutes. He's a good fantasy point per minute guy. 11% ownership seems perfectly reasonable.
And then is there anything else that we should be looking to get to from the Lakers? Thomas Bryant, obviously still starting at center, but he's become more expensive. Any of these other pieces outside of LeBron and Westbrook appealing options?
LeBron, Westbrook, Bryant are the only ones that I'm really interested in.
All right. That is going to do it for us today, guys. Thank you very much for sticking around and watching. And check out all the content we have for the rest of the day. We've got our NFL strategy show coming up, but then in addition, NBA Deeper Dive, NBA Live Before Lock. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I hope to see you guys later.